The letter was not hers, and yet Lady Viola Fairbourne knew, the instant she saw the blue seal glinting upon the silver tray, that it had somehow been placed there to destroy her. The morning room at Belwick Hall had been arranged to look effortless, which meant 3 footmen had been scolded before 9 o'clock, the best porcelain had been brought down from the locked cabinet, and Lady Windermere had inspected every chair as though the fate of England rested upon the spacing between them. Sunlight lay pale across the Turkey carpet. A coal fire burned low despite the mild spring morning. Outside the tall windows, the lawns rolled toward the avenue where the first carriages would soon appear, bringing those select relations and neighboring families privileged enough to witness what her father called a private family breakfast and what everyone else understood to be the beginning of a ducal engagement. Viola stood near the sideboard, not quite in the center of the room and not quite hidden. She had learned long ago to occupy such spaces. Near enough to be useful. Far enough not to be blamed for seeking attention. Her gown was pearl grey silk, carefully altered from one made 2 seasons ago, with fresh lace at the cuffs to disguise where the fabric had begun to show wear. Her gloves were clean, her dark hair arranged smoothly, her posture faultless. No one looking at her would have guessed that she had slept only a few hours, or that she had awakened with the uneasy knowledge that by evening her name would be joined to one of the oldest titles in the kingdom. Adrian Vale, Duke of Loxford, had asked for her hand 3 weeks earlier in the language of duty, family settlement, and mutual advantage. He had not spoken of love. Neither had Viola. In houses such as Belwick Hall, love was treated like music after dinner. Pleasant when it occurred, unnecessary when accounts had to be balanced. The Earl of Windermere, her father, had accepted the offer with the relief of a man who had been standing too close to an open cliff and discovered a bridge beneath his feet. House of Fairbourne needed Loxford more than anyone was willing to say aloud. Viola knew it. Her mother knew it. Her younger sister, Celia, knew it most sharply of all. "There you are," Celia said, entering with a brightness that made the room seem to turn toward her. She was dressed in primrose muslin, a color that would have made Viola look tired but made Celia appear almost lit from within. A small gold cross rested at her throat. Her curls had been arranged to seem carelessly perfect, which meant her maid had likely labored over them for an hour. "Mamma was asking for you." Viola looked toward Lady Windermere, who was speaking to the housekeeper near the mantel and did not appear to be asking for anyone. "Was she?" Celia smiled. "Well, perhaps I only thought she was. You know how quiet you become in corners. One forgets whether you're present at all." The words were light enough to pass as teasing. They always were. That was Celia's gift. She could draw a thin blade across the skin of a conversation and leave no mark visible enough to complain of. Viola adjusted the placement of a spoon beside the tea service. "I am present, Celia." "Of course you are." Celia came closer, lowering her voice as if to offer sisterly confidence. "And very composed. I admire it. Truly. If I were to be announced as a future duchess before half the county, I think I would look rather more alive." Viola kept her hand still on the spoon. "Then it is fortunate the announcement concerns me." Celia's smile did not falter, but something quick passed through her eyes. "Yes. Fortunate." Across the room, their father's voice rose. "The Duke of Loxford is expected before 11. Everything must proceed without awkwardness." He said awkwardness with a glance toward Viola, as though she were an old carpet wrinkle that might trip an important guest. Viola inclined her head, because that was what was expected. She had been raised to understand that a daughter's first duty was to make no unpleasant shape in the family portrait. Celia could sparkle, pout, sing, weep prettily, and be forgiven before luncheon. Viola had been praised for steadiness until steadiness became another word for being used. The butler entered then, carrying the Morning Post upon a silver salver. A few letters for Lord Windermere. One for Lady Windermere from a cousin in Bath. A folded note addressed to Celia in a lively feminine hand. And beneath them, half shadowed by the edge of a newspaper, the blue-sealed letter. Viola saw it because she noticed small things. A lowered voice. A misplaced glove. A servant's hesitation. The way her mother pressed her lips together when bills arrived. The seal was a deep, unnatural blue, the color of a winter dust just before it turned black. The direction was turned partly away, but she saw enough to recognize her own name. Lady Viola Fairbourne. The writing resembled hers at a careless glance. That was the first wrongness. The second was that Viola never used blue sealing wax. She had used ivory wax since childhood, first because Mrs. Alder, her governess, had preferred it, and later because habit had become a private comfort. Before she could reach for the letter, Celia's gloved hand moved across the tray. Quick! Graceful! Almost invisible. Oh, Celia said, plucking it up with a little laugh. This must be yours, Viola. You do leave things in the oddest places. Viola turned to her. I have not seen that letter before. Have you not? Celia tilted it, but not enough for Viola to read the direction fully. Perhaps you forgot. I do not generally forget letters addressed to me. No, of course not. Celia's voice softened. Several people had turned at the exchange. Lady Windermere looked over, her expression sharpening with warning. Celia's eyes glistened with wounded sweetness. I only meant to help. You needn't sound so severe. There it was. The tiny shift by which Viola became unkind without having done anything cruel. Lord Windermere frowned. Viola, this is hardly the morning for sharpness. The blue letter rested now in Celia's hand, half hidden against the folds of her primrose skirt. Viola felt the air tighten around her ribs. She could ask for it in front of everyone, but Celia had already made that seem ungenerous. She could remain silent, but silence had always been the room in which other people arranged her fate. If the letter bears my name, Viola said, evenly, I should like to see it. Celia blinked, all innocence. Now? With guests arriving at any moment. Yes. Lady Windermere stepped between them with the smile she used when servants made mistakes before company. Later, Viola. It is only a letter. Only a letter. The phrase settled coldly. In a house like Belwick Hall, only a letter could refuse a proposal, accept one, ruin a reputation, settle an inheritance, or end a woman's future before breakfast. Before Viola could answer, the sound of carriage wheels came from the drive. The room reacted at once. Lady Windermere straightened. Lord Windermere tugged at his waistcoat. Celia slipped the blue-sealed letter into the small pocket hidden in the side of her gown. The movement was so swift that anyone else might have missed it. Viola did not. The butler crossed the hall. Voices murmured beyond the door. Then Adrian Vale, Duke of Loxford, entered Belwick Hall with the calm of a man accustomed to having rooms rearrange themselves around him. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed in a morning coat so precisely cut that fashion seemed less a choice than a discipline. His face was not handsome in the easy, golden way society adored. It was more arresting than that, all controlled lines and grave attention. He bowed to Lady Windermere, greeted Lord Windermere, and accepted the fluttering courtesies of those nearest the door with a composure that bordered on coldness. Then his gaze moved across the room and found Viola. Not Celia in primrose. Not the silver service. Not the nervous pride of her father. Viola. She curtsied, feeling the weight of every eye that followed his attention. Your Grace. Lady Viola. His voice was low, polished, and quiet enough that those who wished to hear had to lean slightly toward it. I hope I have not kept you waiting. Not at all. It was the answer required. It was also not the truth. Something in his gaze sharpened, as if he had heard both versions. Celia moved forward with a graceful little curtsy. Your Grace, how kind of you to come early. We were all beginning to wonder whether dukes observe clocks differently from the rest of us. A few guests smiled. Adrian looked at her with courteous indifference. Only when clocks presume too much. Celia laughed, though not immediately. Viola would have admired the reply if her attention had not remained fixed upon the hidden pocket of Celia's gown. Adrian's gaze followed hers for the smallest fraction of a second. His expression did not alter. That was what made the moment more dangerous. A man who showed surprise could be dismissed as curious. A man who concealed it had seen enough to remember. Lord Windermere clapped his hands once, too loudly. Well, then. Shall we take our places? This is a happy morning, and I will not have it spoiled by delay. Happy. Viola looked at the china, the flowers, her mother's tightened smile, her sister's bright eyes, and the Duke, who had just noticed what no one else had noticed. The blue letter had vanished from sight, but not from the room. It seemed to pulse beneath every polite word, waiting for the moment when courtesy would no longer be able to contain it. As Adrian offered Viola his arm to lead her toward the breakfast table, his sleeve brushed her glove, brief and formal. No impropriety. No tenderness. Yet his voice lowered so only she could hear. "Something troubled you before I entered." Viola kept her gaze forward. "It was nothing, Your Grace." "No," he said. "It was a letter." Her breath caught, so softly that no one else heard it. Adrian did not look at her. He merely guided her past Celia with perfect composure, as if he had not just placed himself beside the one truth everyone else was preparing to ignore. By the time the first course had been placed upon the long table, Viola understood that the morning had already divided itself into two performances. The first belonged to her father, who sat at the head with the pleased severity of a man presenting prosperity he did not possess. The second belonged to Celia, who smiled as though nothing in the world weighed more heavily than the proper angle of a spoon. Between them, Viola sat beside the Duke of Loxford and felt the hidden letter moving through the room like a cold draught no fire could warm. Lord Windermere lifted his coffee cup with a hand just steady enough to look natural. "We are honored, Your Grace, that you have agreed to make this a family matter before society is informed." Adrian inclined his head. A private understanding is often wiser than a public surprise. Viola felt those words brush the edge of the secret Celia had tucked away. Celia only lowered her lashes and broke a piece of toast into half she did not eat. Lady Windermere spoke quickly, as if silence itself were unsafe. "Viola has always been a sensible girl. Quiet, of course, but dependable. One does value dependability in a wife." The praise landed like a folded napkin placed over something stained. Viola smiled because she had been trained to accept such offerings without flinching. "I have tried to be useful, Mamma." "More than useful," Lord Windermere said, though his eyes moved toward the Duke rather than his daughter. "A daughter who understands duty is a blessing to any house." Adrian set down his cup. "Duty is admirable when it is chosen. Less so when it is assigned to one person so everyone else may call themselves fortunate." The table stilled for only a breath. It was not enough for scandal. It was enough for Celia to look up. Viola kept her gaze lowered, but warmth rose beneath her skin. Not pleasure. Not exactly. Recognition was more dangerous than praise. Praise could be ignored. Recognition entered the room and rearranged the furniture of one's heart. "Your Grace is philosophical this morning," Celia said lightly. "Perhaps dukes have the luxury of making duty sound optional." "No," Adrian replied. "We have the burden of knowing how often others pretend it is not." Celia's smile thinned before it brightened again. "How grave. Viola will suit you very well, then. She has always had a talent for gravity." A few guests gave soft, polite laughs. Viola reached for her cup and did not drink. In the old days, she might have softened the moment by smiling at herself, making a small joke, allowing the room to place her back where it preferred her. She did not do that now. She only said, "Gravity prevents many falls." Adrian's eyes turned to her. Not sharply. Not with amusement. With attention. Celia's fork touched her plate with a small sound. "How clever," she murmured. "I do hope London appreciates cleverness more in duchesses than it does in daughters." Lord Windermere cleared his throat. "London appreciates rank." The sentence revealed more than he intended. That was the trouble with desperation. It sometimes forgot to wear gloves. Viola had known, of course, that the family accounts were strained. She had seen fewer candles lit in unused rooms, fewer visiting servants hired during house parties, fewer parcels delivered from London shops. She had heard the pause before her mother spoke of milliners. She had seen her father's study door closed for hours with Mr. Pritchard, the family solicitor, inside. Yet no one had said plainly that the alliance with Loxford had become a plank thrown across dark water. No one had said Viola was expected to walk it without looking down. Adrian looked from Lord Windermere to Lady Windermere, then to Viola. His expression remained courteous, but Viola sensed calculation beneath it, not coldness alone. He was seeing the room as he had seen the letter. He was noting what others hoped would pass unnoticed. Breakfast ended with the appearance of triumph. Plates were removed. Cups were refilled. Lady Windermere shepherded guests toward the drawing room, promising music later and speaking of the weather with unusual intensity. Celia drifted ahead of the group, her primrose skirts catching the light. Viola rose more slowly. She had almost reached the door when she heard her sister's voice beyond the half-open passage to the small sitting room. "Mamma, you cannot truly think this is wise." Viola stopped. She should not have. A lady did not listen where she had not been invited. But then, a sister did not hide letters meant to ruin another sister's morning. Lady Windermere answered in a low, strained tone. "Do not begin now, Celia. I am only saying what everyone will think. Viola is suitable, yes. She is obedient. She is steady. But a Duchess of Loxford must be admired." A pause followed. Then Celia added, softer and sharper, "He chose her because of duty, not admiration." Viola's fingers closed around the edge of her glove. The words should not have hurt. They were not new. They were merely old bruises pressed by a familiar hand. Lady Windermere sighed. The Duke's reasons are his own. No, they are Papa's debts and Mr. Pritchard's papers and Viola's convenient willingness to be grateful for whatever is offered. Enough. Is it? Because once she is Duchess, everyone will pretend she was always meant for greatness. They will forget who made rooms pleasant while she stood in the corner judging them. Viola does not judge you. Celia gave a small laugh without mirth. She does. She does it silently, which makes it worse. Viola stepped back before the boards could betray her. In doing so, she nearly collided with the one person she least expected to find behind her. Adrian Vale stood at the bend of the corridor, close enough to have heard enough, not close enough to make a scene. A footman passed at the far end carrying a tray, and one of Lady Windermere's maids stood near the linen press, which made the place improper for intimacy but safe for speech. Viola straightened. "Your Grace." "Lady Viola." His gaze moved once toward the sitting-room door, then returned to her face. "I did not intend to overhear." "Neither did I." That does not make the words less spoken. She looked toward the drawing room, where voices rose in practiced brightness. In families, many things are spoken and then treated as if they vanished because no one repeated them. Is that how Belwick Hall keeps peace? Belwick Hall keeps appearance. His expression changed by a fraction. "And you keep the rest?" She almost laughed. It would have been easier if he had mocked her. Kindness required more defense. "I keep what is necessary." Who decided it was necessary? No one decided. It simply became true. He stepped slightly aside as another servant crossed the passage, giving her ample room, never trapping her, never lowering his voice beyond propriety. That restraint unsettled her more than boldness would have done. "Your sister wounds with a smile," he said. "You do not answer her. When Celia is cruel, people call it feeling. When I object, they call it severity." Adrian watched her with the same controlled focus he had given the letter. "Then they have mistaken your restraint for consent." Viola looked at him fully. "Perhaps restraint is all that has been available to me." No, his voice was quiet. "It is what you have used because no one has permitted you a sharper tool." The sitting-room door opened. Celia emerged, one hand at her waist where the hidden pocket lay beneath the folds of primrose muslin. She saw them together and halted. Surprise flashed first. Then calculation. Then the soft, wounded expression returned, flawless as painted porcelain. "Viola," she said. "There you are. Mamma wondered where you had gone." Viola felt the old impulse to apologize rise to her lips. She held it there. She did not release it. "I am here." Celia's gaze slid to Adrian. "I hope my sister has not been boring you with family seriousness, Your Grace. She does make even happy occasions feel like committee meetings." Adrian did not smile. "I asked her a question." "How brave of you." Celia laughed. Viola answers questions as if they were examinations. Only when the question matters. His tone remained polished. The rebuke was so quiet that it took Celia a moment to feel it. Color touched her cheeks. Viola should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt danger. Celia did not forgive being made small, least of all before a man whose title could transform a woman's entire life. "Then I shall leave you to important questions," Celia said. "Though I do hope we shall all remember this is meant to be a joyful day." Her fingers brushed the hidden pocket as she turned away. The gesture was brief, but Adrian saw it. Viola knew he saw it because his gaze followed the movement before returning to her face. "She still has the letter," he said. "Yes." "Do you know what it contains?" No, the answer came out more vulnerable than she wished. "But I know she wants me afraid of it." For the first time that morning, the Duke's composure seemed less like coldness and more like a door being locked against a storm. "Then we shall not give her the pleasure of haste." Viola drew a careful breath. From the drawing room, her father called for them with forced cheer. Guests were gathering. The announcement was coming. Celia had vanished ahead of them with the letter, and Viola understood, with a clarity that left no room for comfort, that her sister was not merely jealous. She was waiting for the exact moment when one folded page could make an entire room turn against her. The drawing room at Belwick Hall had never seemed so crowded to Viola, though fewer than 20 people stood beneath its pale green walls and gilt-framed portraits. Her father had called the gathering intimate, which meant every guest had been chosen for usefulness. There was Lady Harbridge, whose dinners could make a reputation appear respectable by candlelight. There was Sir Alton Merrick, who repeated nothing until he had improved it. There were 2 elderly cousins who could be relied upon to disapprove in public and remember every detail in private. Every chair, every cup, every polite breath had been arranged around the announcement Lord Windermere was about to make. Viola entered on the Duke of Loxford's arm and felt the room shift toward them. She had walked into drawing rooms all her life, but never as the woman everyone was meant to see. It was not triumph. It was exposure. Celia stood near the pianoforte with Lady Windermere, her primrose gown bright against the dark wood. Her face held exactly the right expression for a younger sister on the morning of an elder sister's elevation. Tender. Proud. A little wistful. No one looking at her would have imagined that a folded page lay hidden against her side like a lit match. Adrian released Viola's hand with perfect formality once they reached the center of the room. He did not step away. The space he kept beside her was not possessive, but it was unmistakable. It said that she was not standing alone. Lord Windermere cleared his throat and raised a glass of sherry, though it was not yet noon. His smile shone too brightly. "My dear friends and family, I thank you for joining us on a morning of uncommon happiness. It is my privilege, and indeed my profound honor, to share with you an understanding that has brought great satisfaction to House of Fairbourne." Viola's mother stood very still. Celia lowered her eyes. Adrian's expression did not change. Viola felt each second lengthen. She wondered whether every engagement announcement in England felt like this to the bride, as if one's name were about to be lifted out of one's own hands and passed around the room. "His Grace, the Duke of Loxford," her father continued, "has done us the honor of seeking an alliance with my eldest daughter, Lady Viola Fairbourne." A soft sound moved through the room. It was not quite surprise, because society had guessed something was coming. It was not quite approval, because approval took time to calculate. It was the sound of minds adjusting. Viola saw Lady Harbridge glance from her grey silk gown to Celia's primrose muslin. She saw Sir Alton lift his brows as though a wager had failed. She saw one cousin press a handkerchief to her mouth, not from feeling, but from the pleasure of being present at news before the rest of London. Lord Windermere's voice grew warmer with relief. "I trust you will join me in offering them every good wish." There should have been congratulations then. There should have been the gentle stir of voices, the small rush of women toward Viola, the measured handshakes offered to the Duke. Instead, Celia made a sound so quiet that it might have been a breath-breaking. Everyone turned. Viola did not. She knew. Before Celia spoke, before the room understood, Viola knew the letter had found its moment. "Papa," Celia whispered. Lord Windermere frowned. "Celia?" She lifted one trembling hand to her bodice, where the hidden pocket lay. I cannot. I have tried. Truly, I have tried to remain silent. Lady Windermere went pale. Celia, this is not the time. That is what everyone says when truth is inconvenient. Celia's voice remained soft, but it carried. She had always known how to be heard without seeming loud. But if His Grace is to bind himself to our family, he deserves honesty. The first true silence fell. Not the polite silence before a toast, but the hungry kind. Viola felt it close around her. Adrian's gaze did not move from Celia. What honesty do you believe has been withheld? He asked. Celia looked at him as though the question wounded her. Your Grace, please understand that I do not say this from jealousy. That was when several guests looked at Viola, because a denial often introduced the accusation better than the accusation itself. I love my sister. No one knows better than I how much she has endured. But there are matters from before your understanding. Matters that may not have been confessed. Viola's father set his glass down with a sharp click. Enough, Celia. No, Celia's lashes glittered. If I wait until after the announcement, it will be too late. If I say nothing, I become part of the deception. Viola found her voice. It came out steady, though something beneath her breastbone had turned to ice. What deception? Celia drew the blue-sealed letter from her pocket. The color of the wax seemed darker in the light, almost indecent against her pale glove. Lady Harbridge leaned forward by a fraction. So Alton ceased pretending not to look. This arrived this morning, Celia said. Addressed to Viola. Then it should have been given to me, Viola replied. Celia flinched beautifully. I meant to protect you. From my own letter. From what it proves. The words entered the room like a stain spreading across silk. Viola took one step forward. Adrian did not stop her. His stillness beside her was colder than anger and far more dangerous. Celia unfolded the page. I did not wish to read it. But when I saw the name, I feared some old attachment had returned to threaten everything. The name? Lord Windermere demanded. Celia swallowed. Mr. Edmund Ralston. A cousin whispered behind her fan. Viola heard it. She had known Edmund Ralston 3 years earlier. He had offered marriage with kindness, and she had refused him with equal kindness because esteem was not love and because even then she had understood she could not build a life from gratitude alone. She had written one letter to him. One. A refusal. Nothing more. Read nothing, Viola said. If that paper bears my name, it is mine. Celia looked at her with sorrow so polished it gleamed. Then tell His Grace there is no secret. There is no secret. Then one line cannot harm you. She lowered her gaze to the page and read, her voice trembling just enough to make cruelty sound like duty. When the house is quiet, I shall meet you where no one may question what remains between us. The room changed. It was subtle and absolute. Shoulders drew back. Eyes sharpened. Lady Windermere made a small wounded noise. Lord Windermere stared at Viola as if she had dropped a torch upon the family name. The line hung above them, stripped of context and dressed as sin. Viola could not breathe for 1 second. Then another. She knew she had not written those words. Or rather, some part of the sentence felt like hers in shape but not in soul, as if someone had taken cloth from one of her gowns and sewn it into a costume meant to shame her. I did not write that, she said. Celia's mouth trembled. Viola, don't make this worse. The softness of it nearly broke something inside her. Not because it convinced her, but because it was designed to convince everyone else. You have a letter in your hand that you kept from me, Viola said. You read it before guests. And now you ask me not to make it worse. Celia pressed the page to her heart. I'm asking you not to lie. A murmur moved through the guests. Lady Harbridge looked away with the delicacy of someone saving a story for later. Viola felt the old machinery of her life begin its work. Celia wept, therefore Celia was injured. Viola stood straight, therefore Viola was cold. Celia accused with tears, therefore Viola must defend without anger, without pain, without sounding wounded enough to be improper. Lord Windermere found his voice first. Your Grace, I must apologize. This is a most unfortunate intrusion upon what should have been a joyful occasion. Adrian did not look at him. His attention remained on the blue-sealed paper. It is not an intrusion if it was prepared. The words were quiet. Several faces turned toward him. Celia blinked. Prepared? You brought the letter into the room. You waited until the announcement began. You read one line, not the whole. That suggests choice. Her hand tightened around the page. I was distressed. Distress does not usually improve timing. A stillness followed. Viola looked at him then. She had expected perhaps withdrawal, perhaps a courteous hardening, perhaps the terrible chill of a man calculating whether a woman's reputation had become too costly. Instead, the Duke of Loxford regarded Celia as though she had placed a puzzle before him and made the error of assuming he would admire the ribbon rather than examine the knot. Celia recovered with admirable speed. Your Grace, I understand you wish to be generous. It does you credit. But surely even you must see that such a letter cannot be ignored. I agree. His voice was calm enough to frighten. Then you believe me? I believe the letter should be examined. Celia's eyes flickered. Viola saw it. So did he. Adrian extended his hand. Give it to me. Celia did not move. The room held its breath. Your Grace? The letter, he said. If it is evidence, it should not remain in the hand of the person making the accusation. Lady Windermere whispered, Celia. Lord Windermere looked as if he wished to command something, but no earl in England commanded a duke in his own judgment. Celia's fingers relaxed by degrees. For the first time that morning, her expression was not perfect. It was only young, angry, and afraid. She stepped forward and placed the blue-sealed letter in Adrian's hand. He took it without haste. He did not open it at once. Instead, he folded it closed along its existing crease, shielding the contents from every hungry eye in the room. This matter will go no further on rumor, he said. No copy will be made. No guest will repeat a line torn from a page as though it were the whole truth. Sir Alton shifted. Lady Harbridge became very interested in her gloves. Adrian turned then, not to Celia, not to Lord Windermere, but to Viola. He did not ask whether she was guilty. He did not ask whether he had been made a fool. He asked only, Lady Viola, have you seen this letter before this morning? No, her answer was barely above a whisper, yet it crossed the room more cleanly than Celia's tears. Did you write to Mr. Ralston in such terms? No, then that is where we begin. Begin. Not end. The word struck Viola with such force that her eyes burned, though she did not allow tears to rise. Around them, the room remained uncertain, still eager for scandal, still reluctant to surrender suspicion. But Adrian had changed the shape of the morning. Celia had meant to place Viola beneath the letter. Instead, the Duke had placed the letter beneath scrutiny. Lord Windermere opened his mouth, perhaps to smooth the matter, perhaps to beg that the announcement continue, perhaps to salvage whatever scraps of dignity remained on the carpet. Adrian spoke first. The engagement is not withdrawn. A sharper silence fell. Celia's face went white. Viola stared at the Duke. Nor, he continued, will it be confirmed by panic, gossip, or theatrical distress. I will hear Lady Viola before I hear London. He slipped the letter inside his coat, close enough to guard it, formal enough to remain proper. Then he offered Viola his arm before the assembled room. It was a small gesture. It was everything. Viola placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve. The room watched. Celia watched most of all. And for the first time since the blue seal had appeared upon the morning tray, Viola felt that the paper meant to ruin her had passed into the hands of the one man in the room who did not fear what truth might cost. The room did not recover so much as rearrange itself around the Duke's decision. Conversations resumed with a delicate, brittle sound of porcelain being set down too carefully. Lady Harbridge murmured something about the lateness of the hour, though the mantel clock had not yet struck 12. Sir Alton Merrick remembered an appointment with a man whose name he could not supply. The elderly cousins kissed Lady Windermere's cheek with the solemnity of mourners and left looking more satisfied than grief should allow. Within 20 minutes, the drawing room that had been meant to witness Viola's rise had emptied itself of all but family, servants, and the man who now carried the blue-sealed letter inside his coat. That was when the true humiliation began. Public cruelty at least had shape. It stood in a room, looked one in the face, and declared itself. Private disappointment was quieter and therefore more dangerous. Lord Windermere stood before the fireplace with one hand braced on the mantel, his back rigid beneath his dark coat. Lady Windermere sat near the sofa, her lace handkerchief clenched so tightly that the embroidery twisted between her fingers. Celia had taken the chair nearest her mother, looking pale and wounded, like a girl who had tried to save everyone and been punished for her courage. Viola remained standing because no one had invited her to sit. Adrian noticed that. Of course he noticed. Lady Viola should be seated, he said. Lord Windermere turned, startled by the simplicity of the rebuke. Naturally. Naturally, of course. Viola took the nearest chair, not because she felt weak, but because refusing would have made her look dramatic, and drama had already chosen its darling in Celia. Adrian remained standing. I would like to speak with Lady Viola about the letter. Lady Windermere stiffened. Your Grace, surely such a discussion is delicate. It is, Adrian said. That is why it should not be conducted in a room full of people who prefer conclusions to questions. Celia looked down at her lap. I never wished to cause a scene. Viola felt the words like a fingertip pressing an old bruise. Adrian did not look at Celia. And yet a scene occurred. Silence struck the room. Lord Windermere's jaw tightened. A duke could be resented. He could not be corrected as one corrected an impertinent nephew. The small morning parlour will do, Lady Windermere said at last, rising with the stiffness of a woman forced to preserve propriety in the middle of disaster. The door will remain open. I shall be present. That will be sufficient, Adrian replied. Viola rose. Celia rose as well. Shouldn't I come? After all, I found the letter. No, Adrian said. The word contained no anger. It contained something worse for Celia. Finality. Her mouth parted, then closed. For one moment, her expression slipped. Not enough for anyone determined to defend her. Enough for Viola. The small morning parlour faced the east garden, where spring light lay thinly over the gravel walk. It was a modest room by Belwick standards, used for correspondence, mending, and conversations that required the fiction of privacy. Lady Windermere placed herself beside the open door, visible from the hall. A housemaid passed once with lowered eyes. The arrangement was proper. It was also suffocating. Adrian drew the letter from his coat and laid it upon the table between them. He did not open it immediately. Before I ask about Mr. Ralston, I should tell you what I have already observed. Viola's fingers tightened in her lap. You need not soften it, Your Grace. I was not intending to. That should have offended her. Instead, it steadied her. The direction resembles your hand, he said. At a glance. Lady Windermere made a distressed sound. Your Grace. At a glance, he repeated, not raising his voice. The resemblance is sufficient to trouble those who wish to be troubled. It is not sufficient to satisfy me. Viola looked at the folded page. The blue wax stared back like an accusation. I have never used that color. I suspected as much. He touched the seal with one gloved finger. It is fashionable enough to be noticed. Too fashionable for a lady who prefers not to draw attention. Viola met his eyes before she could prevent herself. You know very little of my preferences. I know you stood in a room while your reputation was questioned and did not waste one word on theatrics. That tells me something. Lady Windermere shifted by the door. Perhaps she heard the respect in his tone and did not know what to do with it. Adrian unfolded the page. Viola forced herself not to flinch. He read silently first, his gaze moving with exacting patience. Then he turned the lower half toward her without releasing the paper from his hand. Do you recognize any portion of this? Viola leaned forward. The first line struck her with a strange, sick familiarity. Yes, she whispered. This is mine. Or part of it is. Lady Windermere pressed a hand to her mouth. Viola. Not as it stands, Viola said, and now her voice grew firmer because truth, once recognized, gave her something beneath her feet. I wrote to Mr. Ralston 3 years ago. He had offered marriage. I refused him. Adrian watched her, but did not interrupt. He was kind, she continued. Gentle. He deserved honesty. I wrote that I respected him too much to accept a proposal when my heart could offer only gratitude. The faintest change crossed Adrian's face at the word heart, but it was gone before it could become anything improper. And the line your sister read? I did not write it in that form. She looked again, closer now. The words seemed to swim, then separate. When the house is quiet, she read slowly, was from another sentence. I wrote that when the house was quiet, I could think clearly enough to answer him with sincerity. Her breath caught. And what remains between us was not about feeling. It was about respect. I wrote that I hoped respect might remain between us, despite my refusal. Lady Windermere closed her eyes. Adrian nodded once, as if a piece had settled into place. The last 2 lines are darker. He angled the letter toward the window. Different pressure. Possibly different ink. See here, where the pen hesitates before the word meet. It is not the hesitation of someone composing. It is the hesitation of someone imitating. Viola saw it then. A tiny break. A tremor where her own hand would have moved cleanly. She felt cold from the inside outward. Someone took my refusal and made it an invitation. Yes. Someone made my honesty look like deceit. Yes. The second yes was quieter. It did not pity her. It acknowledged the wound without making a spectacle of it. Viola looked down at her hands. She had thought the danger was that people would believe she had written a compromising letter. That was bad enough. But this was worse. Someone had entered the private chamber of her own voice and rearranged it until it testified against her. Who had access to your correspondence? Adrian asked. Lady Windermere answered before Viola could. No one. Viola keeps her things very orderly. Orderly does not mean untouched. Viola thought of her writing desk in the corner of her bedchamber, the small brass key she kept in a porcelain dish, the afternoon 2 weeks ago when Celia had come in laughing, claiming she needed blue ribbon for a bonnet and could not remember where hers had been put. Viola had left the room for less than 5 minutes. My sister borrowed my key, she said. Lady Windermere went rigid. Celia would not. Viola turned to her mother. Mamma, I have not accused her. I have answered a question. The sentence landed with more force than she intended. For once, Lady Windermere had no immediate reply. Adrian folded the letter along its original crease. The folds are wrong. Viola looked back at him. Wrong. This sheet was refolded after alteration. Whoever handled it did not know your habit. He took another paper from the writing table, blank and clean. When you fold a letter, how do you do it? The request was simple. Viola reached for the page, folded it once, then again, pressing the edge with her thumb. Adrian compared the blank fold to the blue-sealed letter. Different. Lady Windermere stared as if folds had suddenly become a language she had never learned. Many people fold paper differently. Exactly, Adrian said. That is why small habits matter. Viola watched his hands. They were careful with the letter, not because paper deserved gentleness, but because what had been done with it had harmed a person. What happens now? She asked. Nothing will be decided today. Lady Windermere let out an anxious breath. But London will hear. London already hears what it wishes, Adrian said. The question is what it will be allowed to repeat. He slipped the letter back into his coat. I will keep the original. Viola rose instinctively. Your Grace, it bears my name. And for that reason, I will not allow it to pass from hand to hand. His voice lowered, though Lady Windermere could still hear. I asked for the letter because I wished to hear you before London did. The words held her still. They should not have felt intimate. They were spoken in daylight, with the door open and her mother 3 yards away. Yet something in Viola's chest loosened with such suddenness that she had to look toward the window. "You may find," she said, "that London prefers the more interesting version. Then London must develop better taste." It was the first dry edge of humor she had heard from him. Against every expectation, Viola nearly smiled. Lady Windermere noticed and looked faintly alarmed, as though calm between a duke and a daughter were somehow less proper than panic. A sound came from the passage. A whisper, then the faint brush of skirts moving too quickly away. Adrian turned his head. Viola did too. The hall was empty, but the air had changed. Celia had been near enough to learn that the letter had not succeeded. Not yet. In her room later, with the door closed and the blue ribbon she had never needed lying across her dressing table, Celia Fairbourne stood before her mirror and pressed her fingers hard against the pocket where the letter had been. Her reflection looked wounded. Her eyes looked furious. If Adrian Vale would not abandon Viola in a private room, then London would have to be made to ask why he had not. One whisper inside Belwick Hall had failed. 100 whispers outside it might yet do what one blue seal had begun. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Belwick Hall had become a house under polite siege. The first carriage arrived before Lady Windermere had finished her tea. The second followed so closely that the horses had barely cleared the front sweep before another pair of wheels sounded over the gravel. No one called it curiosity. Curiosity was vulgar. The ladies came with baskets of forced early flowers, folded notes, inquiries after Lady Windermere's nerves, an expression so carefully arranged that concern and appetite could pass for sisters. Viola watched from the morning room window as Lady Harbridge's dark carriage came into view, and she understood at once that Celia had succeeded in doing what the Duke had tried to prevent. The letter had not been passed from hand to hand, but its shadow had. "You must receive them calmly," Lady Windermere said behind her. Her voice had the brittle edge of a woman who had not slept. "No one must think there is anything to hide." Viola turned from the window. "People do not arrive this early unless they believe something has been hidden. Do not be sharp." The old command. The old shape of the cage. Viola looked at her mother and said nothing. A day ago, silence would have been obedience. Now it felt like measuring the strength of a door before deciding whether to open it. Celia entered with a lace shawl around her shoulders, though the room was warm. She looked pale enough to be admired for suffering. "Mamma, Lady Harbridge is in the drawing-room. She says she came only because she was uneasy after yesterday." Lady Windermere touched her forehead. Of course she was uneasy. Anyone would be. Celia's gaze moved to Viola. "I'm sure she doesn't mean to pry." "No," Viola said. "She means to confirm." Celia flinched as if struck by a harsh word rather than a plain one. "I don't know why you must make everyone your enemy." "I do not. Some people volunteer." Lady Windermere drew in a breath. "Viola." Celia lowered her eyes. "It is all right, Mamma. She is distressed. I would be too, in her position." That was neatly done. Viola had to admire the craft of it even while it turned her stomach. Celia had accused her, withheld her letter, exposed a line before guests, and now offered forgiveness for the distress she had caused. It was a performance meant for every doorway. The housekeeper lingered near the hall. A maid folded napkins with unnatural slowness. Belwick Hall had ears again. In the drawing-room, Lady Harbridge rose with both hands extended, her face softened into the expression used at sickbeds and scandals. "My dear Lady Viola. How trying this must all be. Good morning, Lady Harbridge." Viola curtsied with the exact depth required. "You are kind to call. One could hardly stay away after such a shock." Lady Harbridge paused, as if inviting Viola to deny the shock, explain the shock, or collapse under it. Viola did none of those things. "Then I hope you will find us recovered." Lady Harbridge's smile tightened. "How brave. Though bravery can be exhausting, can it not? Especially when old attachments are mentioned so suddenly." Celia sat near the fire, eyes lowered to her embroidery. Her needle did not move. Lady Windermere reached for the tea with hands that were almost steady. Viola accepted a cup, set it upon the saucer, and let the silence stretch one breath longer than comfort allowed. "If you refer to Mr. Ralston," she said, there was no attachment. Lady Harbridge's brows lifted delicately. No? I had heard he admired you. Many people admire what they do not understand. Celia's needle pierced the linen too hard. Lady Harbridge looked from one sister to the other. And the Duke? He is satisfied. There it was. Not concern for Viola's heart. Not concern for truth. Concern for whether the most powerful man in the room had stepped away from her. His Grace does not appear to be a man easily satisfied by gossip, Viola replied. Lady Windermere made a faint choking sound into her tea. Lady Harbridge smiled as though she had been offered a sweetmeat. How very loyal of you to say so. It is not loyalty. It is observation. Another carriage arrived. Then another. By noon, the drawing-room had collected enough sympathy to bury a woman alive. Lady Caraway wanted to know whether Mr. Ralston was in London. Mrs. Vale Finch, a distant connection of nobody important and everybody useful, asked whether blue wax was a family habit. One elderly cousin wondered aloud whether young ladies wrote too freely when they believed themselves unobserved. Each question came wrapped in velvet. Each one had a hook inside. Celia answered whenever she could, always gently, always with a tremor in the voice. We must not judge too quickly. Viola has always been private. I'm certain she meant no harm. The defense was worse than accusation. It assumed guilt and recommended mercy. Viola sat through it with her back straight and her hand still in her lap. She felt herself becoming, in their eyes, a story they had already begun to prefer. The quiet elder daughter with a hidden correspondence. The noble Duke deceived. The sweet younger sister forced by conscience to speak. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Then the butler entered, carrying a card upon a small salver. He crossed to Lady Windermere, bowed, and presented it. Lady Windermere read the card. Colour returned to her face in a rush so sudden it looked painful. His Grace, the Duke of Loxford, she said. Every woman in the room became still. A calling card could do what no protest from Viola could accomplish. It could alter the weather. Adrian Vale entered a few moments later, dressed in dark blue, his hat and gloves in one hand, his expression composed beyond the reach of speculation. He bowed to Lady Windermere, acknowledged the callers with exact courtesy, and then turned to Viola. Not to Celia. Not to the women waiting to measure his distance from scandal. To Viola. Lady Viola, he said. I hope I do not intrude. The room leaned without moving. Viola rose. Not at all, Your Grace. Lady Harbridge found her voice first. How generous of you to call after yesterday's unfortunate discomfort. Adrian looked at her. Discomfort is what one feels when a chair is poorly placed. Yesterday was an accusation. A silence fell so cleanly that Viola heard the faint tick of the mantel clock. Celia's embroidery slid from her lap to the carpet. She bent to retrieve it, hiding her face. Lady Harbridge gave a small, careful laugh. How precise you are, Your Grace. Precision prevents mischief from dressing as concern. Viola should not have looked at him then. She did, and found his gaze already resting on her, not with warmth exactly, but with a steadiness that made warmth unnecessary. He had come publicly. He had placed his card in her mother's hand while half the county sat waiting to see whether he would vanish. That was not a declaration of love. It was, in its restrained and formidable way, a refusal to let her be erased. Lady Windermere, desperate to repair the atmosphere, gestured toward the tea. Will you take refreshment, Your Grace? Thank you, no. I came with an invitation. Lady Harbridge's interest sharpened. Adrian continued, my aunt, Lady Marchvale, is unable to attend Lady Harbridge's dinner tomorrow. I understand the gathering will be select. Lady Harbridge straightened. Indeed, Your Grace. Then I would be honored if Lady Viola would accompany her parents and attend under my escort. The room changed again. It was astonishing, Viola thought, how quickly pity could become calculation. Lady Harbridge's eyes flickered. Mrs. Vale Finch adjusted her shawl. Lady Caraway looked as though she had just misplaced a delicious certainty. Lady Windermere looked relieved enough to weep. Celia looked up slowly. "That is very kind," she said. "But perhaps Viola would prefer a quieter evening." Adrian's voice remained even. "Lady Viola can speak for herself." The words reached Viola like a hand offered across water. Not rescue. Permission. No, more than permission. Recognition. Everyone turned toward her. For once, the attention did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a question she was allowed to answer. Viola lifted her chin. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will attend." Lady Harbridge's smile returned, though it had lost some of its ease. "Then we shall expect you." How delightful. Delightful. That word would be repeated in carriages before the afternoon ended. Viola could almost hear it travelling through Mayfair, altered with every telling. The Duke had called. The Duke had invited her. The Duke had not withdrawn. Adrian remained only long enough to make the point unmistakable. Before leaving, he stepped near Viola with all proper distance between them. "You are not obliged to face them." "I know. Do you?" His voice was lower now, meant for her alone though still safe in that crowded room. "Yes," she said. "That is why I choose to go." Something in his eye softened by a fraction. "Then I shall see that they remember it was your choice." After he left, the callers did not stay long. Their purpose had been spoiled. Sympathy could not thrive where a duke had just placed his name beside the woman they had come to doubt. By 3 o'clock, Belwick Hall was quiet again, though not peaceful. Viola went upstairs and stood before her writing desk. The small brass key lay in its porcelain dish. She touched it and remembered Celia asking for ribbon. Blue ribbon. A harmless errand. A convenient absence. Downstairs, in the little sitting room, Celia wrote with swift, angry care upon a sheet of plain paper. She did not have the original letter, but she did not need it. A copied line, folded neatly and sent to Lady Harbridge before dinner, might be enough. If the Duke insisted upon standing beside Viola, then London would be invited to watch him do it under 100 eyes. Lady Harbridge's townhouse in Mayfair had been lit as though candles could make judgment look like hospitality. By the time Viola entered on her father's arm, with Lady Windermere and Celia just behind her, the dining-room doors stood open, the mirrors flashed with gold, and every face in the reception-room wore the same polished expression of welcome strained over expectation. No one stared outright. That would have been vulgar. Instead, they glanced with the refined discipline of people trained to cut without moving the wrist. Viola felt the weight of those glances settle upon her gown, her gloves, her mouth, her hands. They were looking for tremor. They were looking for guilt. They were looking for the first crack in the composure they had always mistaken for lack of feeling. Adrian Vale stood near the mantel speaking with an older gentleman in a black coat, but he turned before Lady Harbridge announced them. Not after. Before. His gaze found Viola across the room and held long enough to make the nearest two ladies look away. It was no embrace, no declaration, no impropriety. It was more useful than all three. It told the room that the Duke of Loxford knew exactly where she was and did not intend to pretend otherwise. Lady Harbridge came forward with both hands outstretched. "Lady Viola, how very brave of you to come." Viola curtsied. "How very kind of you to invite me." The answer was smooth. The warning beneath it was not loud enough to be rude, but it was clear enough for Lady Harbridge's eyes to sharpen. Celia gave a soft sigh behind her. Viola has been determined to prove herself equal to the evening. Lady Harbridge turned warmly toward her. "Dear Lady Celia. You're concerned as you credit." Viola watched the exchange and understood the seating before she saw it. Celia would be pitted near the center. Viola would be tested where conversation could be aimed at her like a needle. Adrian crossed the room. "Lady Viola. Your Grace. I trust the drive was not fatiguing. Only long enough to be instructive." His mouth almost moved. "Almost. Then I hope the evening continues your education less aggressively." She should not have felt steadier because of one dry sentence. She did. Dinner was announced soon after. The arrangement placed Viola between Mr. Percival Dane, a gentleman with soft hands and a habit of smiling before unpleasant remarks, and Lady Caraway, who had already asked 3 people whether Edmund Ralston had returned to town. Adrian sat across from Viola, not beside her. Celia sat farther down, near Lady Harbridge, perfectly positioned to lower her eyes whenever Viola's name became interesting. At first, the conversation behaved. There was talk of Italian singers, late spring weather, a new phaeton seen in Hyde Park, and whether Almack's had become too lenient or too severe. Viola answered when addressed and did not offer herself as an exhibit. The soup was removed. Fish followed. Then Mr. Dane turned the stem of his wineglass between two fingers and said, as though continuing a discussion no one had begun, "There is something fascinating about letters, is there not? They carry more truth than people intend." Lady Caraway's fan paused. Across the table, Adrian set down his fork. Viola felt the room tilt toward her. She turned to Mr. Dane. "Do they?" He smiled. "I have always thought so. A spoken word can be denied, but a written one remains. Unless it is copied badly," Viola said. A faint stir moved around the table. Mr. Dane's smile held. "Copied? What a curious thought." "Not very curious. Most schoolrooms contain poor copies of good handwriting." Lady Caraway made a soft sound that might have been surprise or delight. Mr. Dane leaned back by an inch. "You speak with experience, Lady Viola. I had a governess who believed handwriting revealed discipline." Viola lifted her glass, then set it down untouched. She also believed a copied hand often reveals more about the imitator than the original writer. Across from her, Adrian's gaze did not leave her face. He did not rescue her. He did not interrupt. His stillness made room for her answer to stand. Mr. Dane recovered. A clever distinction. Still, one must admit letters do not forge themselves. There it was. Open enough to wound, veiled enough to deny. Viola felt the old silence rise. She had worn that silence for years because it preserved dinners, protected mothers from embarrassment, kept Celia glowing, allowed her father to call the household peaceful. But the letter had changed something. Or perhaps the Duke had, when he had placed the accusation beneath scrutiny instead of placing Viola beneath it. She looked at Mr. Dane and spoke with perfect calm. "No, Mr. Dane. Letters do not forge themselves. Nor do they walk from a locked writing desk, borrow unfamiliar sealing wax, choose a dramatic hour, and place themselves in the hand of a person eager to read only one line." The table went utterly still. It was not a loud victory. It was better. It was a door opening in a room where everyone had pretended there was no door. Celia's cheeks lost color. Lady Harbridge reached for her glass and missed the stem on the first try. Mr. Dane blinked, and for once his prepared smile had nowhere to rest. "I meant no offense," he said. "Then you were careless with your meaning." Adrian's voice cut in at last, quiet and exact. "And carelessness with a lady's reputation is not improved by being called conversation." Mr. Dane bowed his head. "Your Grace. You will not repeat speculation in my hearing unless you are prepared to defend it as fact." The warning was delivered so evenly that it seemed almost mild. It was not mild. Everyone at the table understood that. Viola looked down at her plate because gratitude, if shown too plainly, would be misunderstood. Yet she felt it move through her anyway, not soft and fluttering, but strong enough to steady her spine. Adrian had waited until she answered. Only then had he drawn the line no one else would cross. The conversation resumed in pieces. Lady Harbridge spoke too brightly of a soprano. Lord Windermere laughed half a second late. Lady Windermere drank more water than wine. Celia said nothing. When the ladies withdrew after dinner, the drawing-room offered a different battlefield. Without the men present, pity became more intimate. Lady Caraway sat beside Viola and placed one gloved hand lightly on the sofa between them. "My dear, you must not let Mr. Dane trouble you. Men enjoy sounding worldly." "Then it is generous of the world to let them practice so often," Viola replied. Lady Caraway stared, then laughed despite herself. It was small. It was real. Viola felt the first small shift of the evening. Not acceptance. Not trust. But uncertainty. That alone was enough to unsettle gossip, which required confidence to travel well. Near the tea table, Celia bent her head toward Lady Harbridge. Viola could not hear every word, but she saw the shape of Celia's expression. Grief. Reluctance. A practiced fear for the Duke. Lady Harbridge's hand moved to the pocket of her gown, then away again. Viola noticed because she had become very good at watching hands. A few minutes later, as the ladies prepared to rejoin the gentlemen, a young maid entered with a fresh tray and nearly stumbled when Lady Harbridge turned too quickly. The girl recovered, but a folded scrap slipped from beneath the edge of the tray and fell near Viola's shoe. Viola bent before anyone could stop her. The maid's face went white. "My lady," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I was told to give it to Mrs. Bell, but there were others, and I didn't know what to do." Viola held the scrap in her gloved fingers. It was not sealed. It bore no direction. One line had been copied across it in a hand meant to resemble hers. "When the house is quiet, I shall meet you." Her pulse struck once, hard. Not the original. A copy. A crude one. Enough to feed a table. Enough to poison 3 drawing rooms by morning. "Who gave this to you?" Viola asked softly. The maid's eyes darted toward the door. "I don't know her name, my lady." "A lady's maid." She said several houses had already received the same. Before Viola could answer, Adrian appeared at the threshold with the gentleman returning behind him. He saw the paper in her hand. He saw the maid's frightened face. He saw Celia across the room, suddenly still. He crossed to Viola without haste, which somehow made the movement more commanding. "Lady Viola?" Viola gave him the scrap. "The letter has grown children, Your Grace." He read the copied line. His expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to cool. Lady Harbridge stepped forward. "Surely this is some servant's confusion." Adrian looked at her. Servants rarely invent scandals their betters have not made profitable. The maid trembled. Viola turned to her and lowered her voice. "You did right to let it fall." The girl looked up, startled by kindness when she had expected blame. Adrian folded the scrap and placed it beside the invisible weight of the original inside his coat. "This was prepared before I took the letter yesterday," he said. "Which means the accusation was never meant to seek truth. It was meant to travel." Celia's face tightened. Only for a second. But Viola saw it. So did Adrian. The room had not cleared Viola's name. Not yet. But something had changed under the candles of Lady Harbridge's careful house. The scandal was no longer a single dangerous line. It was a campaign. And campaigns, unlike accidents, had authors. By the following evening, the copy of the letter had become more dangerous than the letter itself. The original lay guarded in the Duke of Loxford's possession, but rumor had discovered that it did not require paper to travel. It needed only breath, a fan raised at the correct angle, a pause before a name, and the word unfortunate spoken with enough tenderness to draw blood. Viola knew this before she stepped into the entrance hall of the King's Theatre, because the footman who opened the carriage door looked at her for half a second too long. Servants learned London's truths before ladies were permitted to deny them. Adrian descended first, then turned and offered his hand. Behind Viola, Lady Windermere shifted anxiously, and Lord Windermere muttered something about dignity beneath his breath. Celia had come with them, of course. Lady Windermere had insisted that refusing to bring her would look like family division. Celia had accepted with downcast eyes and a shawl of pale blue silk that made her appear fragile enough to be believed. Viola placed her gloved hand in Adrian's. The contact was brief, proper, and witnessed by half the entrance hall. It steadied her anyway. "Remember," he said quietly as she stepped down. "You are not on trial. London appears to disagree. London enjoys being wrong in company." The reply was dry enough to make her breathe again. Then they entered the blaze of light. The theatre rose around them in tiers of velvet boxes and bright faces, every one arranged to appear absorbed in music while searching for scandal. Jewels trembled at throats. Fans flickered. Opera glasses lifted, then lowered as if the movement had been accidental. Viola felt the first sweep of attention pass over Adrian, then settle upon her like a net. He did not hurry her forward. He did not hide her behind his shoulder. He walked beside her at a pace that made retreat impossible and shame unnecessary. Their box was near enough to be seen and high enough to be envied. Lady Windermere took the rear chair. Lord Windermere stood stiffly near the curtain. Celia sat where candlelight could touch her cheek whenever she turned her head in sorrow. Viola sat at the front beside Adrian because he had drawn the chair for her himself, and every watching eye had seen it. The first act began. Music filled the theatre, rich and sorrowful, and for a little while Viola could almost believe sound might cover whispers. It did not. During the interval, the real performance began. A folded scrap passed from a gentleman in the neighbouring box to a lady in rose satin. She read it, pressed her lips together, and passed it behind her. Another appeared across the aisle. Then another. Small white papers moved through the theatre like moths in candlelight. Viola's hands tightened upon her fan. Adrian saw the movement. "Do you see them?" she asked. "Yes." "Copies?" "Likely." He looked not at the nearest paper but at the hands through which it passed. That was his way. Other people watched faces. He watched transfer, timing, motive. Celia leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Your Grace, perhaps we should leave before this becomes worse." Lady Windermere whispered, "Celia, not now. I'm only thinking of Viola." Celia turned to her with shining eyes. "You know I am. I don't want her to be stared at." Viola looked at her sister. "Then you must be disappointed." Celia flinched. Before she could answer, a stir began near the staircase leading to the boxes. A gentleman had entered late, removing his gloves with the embarrassed haste of a man who had not intended to be noticed and had chosen the worst possible evening for it. Viola recognized him at once, though 3 years had altered him. Mr. Edmund Ralston was still fair, still mild in expression, but less boyish than memory had kept him. He looked toward the Loxford box, saw Viola, and stopped. The whisper that followed his name moved faster than any copied scrap. Celia's face changed. Only for a moment. Fear slipped through the grief. Adrian rose. "Mr. Ralston," he said, his voice carrying without seeming raised. Edmund bowed from the passage, visibly startled by the attention of a duke. "Your Grace." "A word, if you please." The neighbouring boxes went very still. Edmund entered with the uneasy dignity of a gentleman dragged into a storm he had not brewed. He bowed to Lady Windermere, then to Viola. "Lady Viola." "Mr. Ralston." His gaze held apology, confusion, and alarm. Adrian took one of the folded scraps from a servant who had intercepted it near the curtain. He held it out. "Have you seen this before tonight?" Edmund read the copied line. His brows drew together. "No." Celia made a soft sound. "Mr. Ralston, perhaps you do not remember. It has been some time." He turned toward her, surprised. "Lady Celia, I assure you, I would remember receiving such a note. But you did correspond with my sister." "Once," he said. His voice grew steadier because truth, unlike rumor, did not require embellishment. "Lady Viola wrote to refuse me. Kindly. Clearly. There was no secret meeting. No impropriety. No promise. The words should have freed the air. Instead, they made it sharper." People in the neighbouring boxes leaned closer. Lady Harbridge, visible across the theatre, touched a folded paper to her fan and watched Adrian with avid interest. Viola felt every eye waiting for him to declare, to accuse, to absolve. He did none of those things. He took the scrap, folded it, and slipped it into his coat with the others. "Thank you, Mr. Ralston." Edmund bowed again. "If I may be of further service, Your Grace, I am at my lodgings in St. James's." "You may be." Adrian's eyes moved beyond him, toward the passage where a liveried attendant had just accepted another folded note from an unseen hand. He was following the trail. Viola understood it. She also understood what the room would see. The Duke had not declared her innocent. He had not spoken the words society craved or dreaded. He had gathered evidence with a coldness that looked, from a distance, like doubt. Celia understood it too. She rose with a small, broken whisper. Viola, please. Don't let this continue. Tell the truth before His Grace is ruined with you. The sentence struck the theatre more loudly than any aria. Heads turned. A woman gasped. Lord Windermere hissed Celia's name. Lady Windermere went white. Viola stood before she knew she had chosen to. The box seemed suddenly too small for breath. I have told the truth. Celia clasped her hands. Then why does it keep following you? It was beautifully cruel because everyone in London had asked the same question in less honest language. Viola felt the answer rise, but if she spoke in anger, they would call it guilt. If she spoke in pain, they would call it confession. Before she could decide, Adrian stepped beside her. He did not touch her at first. He addressed the box, the passage, and every listening face beyond it. Lady Viola will be leaving now. Celia's lips parted in triumph, too quickly hidden. Lady Harbridge's fan paused across the theatre. Adrian extended his hand to Viola, palm upward, in full view of everyone. Not to dismiss her. Not to remove an embarrassment. To escort her. The difference mattered, though not everyone would admit it. Viola looked at his hand. Then at his face. Your Grace? With dignity, he said softly. Not retreat. She placed her hand in his. Together they stepped from the box while the theatre watched. Adrian did not hurry. He did not shield his face. He collected 2 more copies from attendants as he passed, each one folded with the same damning line. At the staircase, Edmund bowed to Viola with visible respect. That small act reached her more deeply than she expected. By the time they reached the carriage, the music had resumed inside, but it sounded distant and unreal. Lord and Lady Windermere followed in a second carriage with Celia, whose silence was more dangerous than her tears. Adrian handed Viola into his carriage with perfect propriety, then sat opposite her, the space between them filled with folded lies. For several moments, neither spoke. The wheels began to move over the stones. Viola looked at the dark window and saw only a faint reflection of herself, pale but upright. You believed Mr. Ralston, she said. Yes. You saw that Celia was afraid. Yes. You gathered the copies. Yes. She turned to him then. And yet in that box, before half of London, you said nothing that told them you believed me. Adrian's face remained controlled, but something in his eyes tightened. If I had accused without proof, she would have become the injured sister and you would have looked desperate. Perhaps. Her voice did not break. That felt like a victory and a loss. But silence has a sound, Your Grace. To the people staring at me tonight, it sounded very much like doubt. He looked at her as though she had placed a blade between them and asked him to acknowledge its edge. Outside, London rolled past in lamplit fragments. Inside the carriage, the evidence rested inside his coat, and the wound rested in the space between them. Lady Viola, he said at last, quieter than she had ever heard him. I did not doubt you. She held his gaze. Then you must learn that sometimes a woman does not only need to be believed in private. Sometimes she needs to survive what your public silence allows. The carriage carried them on through the dark, and for the first time since he had asked for the letter, the Duke of Loxford had no immediate answer. The carriage did not stop at Belwick Hall at once. Adrian gave one quiet instruction to the coachman, and the horses turned toward the quieter side of Berkeley Square, where lamps glowed behind wet iron railings and the noise of the theatre softened into the distance. Viola noticed the change but did not ask about it. She had spent too many years being told that questions made rooms uncomfortable, and tonight she was too tired to make discomfort easier for anyone else. Adrian sat opposite her, his face half-shadowed, his gloved hands resting upon the head of his cane. The folded copies of the false line lay inside his coat. She could almost feel them there, paper ghosts pressing between them. At last he spoke. You were right. Viola looked away from the window. That is a dangerous beginning, Your Grace. It is also an honest one. His voice was level, but stripped of the cool precision he had worn in the theatre. I guarded the evidence and failed to guard you. The words entered the carriage with the quiet force of a door opening. Viola had expected explanation. She had expected strategy. She had perhaps expected the kind of apology gentlemen gave when they wished a woman to stop being wounded before the wound inconvenienced them. She had not expected responsibility. "You did protect me," she said, though she was not certain whether she offered fairness or defense. "You took me from the box." After I allowed everyone in it to wonder what my silence meant. He leaned forward slightly, never enough to crowd her. "I thought truth would be strongest if I let the accusation show its own pattern. I thought if I spoke too soon, your sister would turn herself into the injured party, and society would pity her more than it believed you. You may be correct. That does not make me right." Outside, a carriage passed in the opposite direction, its wheels loud over the stones. Viola watched the brief flare of lantern light move across his face. He looked less like a duke then, and more like a man forced to examine the cost of his own control. "I did not doubt you," he said. "Not in that box. Not before. Not now." The words should have soothed her completely. They did not. They soothed one part and sharpened another. Then I needed to hear it where they could hear it. "I know. Do you?" He took that without flinching. "I am learning." That undid her more than certainty would have done. Viola pressed her hands together in her lap. "All my life, when Celia made me appear severe or unkind, I was told to let the matter pass. To be dignified. To be quiet. To trust that people who knew me would understand." Her mouth tightened. They did not understand. They accepted the version that entertained them most and praised me for not objecting. Adrian's gaze did not leave her. And tonight I repeated the shape of that old wound. She drew a breath. "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting a sentence. When he opened them, something had settled. "Then I will not repeat it again." The carriage stopped at the edge of the square. No footman opened the door. No one interrupted. The pause was clearly intentional, a pocket of time created within propriety. Adrian did not move closer. "What do you need from me tomorrow?" he asked. Viola almost said nothing. The word rose from habit, polished by years of use. "Nothing. I am well. It is of no consequence." Instead, she thought of Celia's fingers upon the pocket of her gown, the blue ribbon on Viola's dressing table, the copied slips at Lady Harbridge's dinner, and the way the false handwriting had seemed to wear her skin. "I need one day," she said. "For what?" "To stop being the object of everyone else's inquiry." His eyes sharpened. "And become the person asking questions." For the first time that night, a faint warmth entered his expression. Not amusement. Respect. "Where will you begin?" "With Mrs. Alder. She was our governess. She taught both Celia and me to write. If someone has copied my hand, she may see what I cannot. You should not go alone." "I do not intend to. My maid will accompany me. The call will be proper. I can send my carriage." No, the word surprised them both, though Viola did not regret it. "If I arrive in your carriage, it becomes your investigation again." Adrian studied her for a moment. "Very well." The agreement was simple. It mattered. "I will have a footman watch the street from a distance," he said. "Not to follow you. To ensure no one interferes." She considered refusing that too, then understood the distinction he was trying to make. Protection without possession. Very well. The carriage resumed its course. When it reached Belwick Hall, Adrian handed her down in front of her parents, who had arrived moments earlier with Celia in the second carriage. Celia's eyes were red, but her mouth tightened when she saw Viola descend with composure. Adrian bowed before them all. "Lady Viola and I have spoken. I do not doubt her." The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Lady Windermere froze. Lord Windermere stared. Celia's lashes flickered. Viola felt the words land where they should have landed sooner. Not in a carriage. In the world. The next morning, Viola left Belwick Hall with her maid, Hannah, seated opposite her in a hired carriage that smelled faintly of leather and lavender sachets. Mrs. Alder lived in a narrow house near Bloomsbury, far from the grand squares where reputations were made and ruined over tea. she received Viola in a modest parlour filled with books, ink bottles, and the neat severity of a woman who had trained young ladies to sit straight, think clearly, and never blot their paper. Mrs. Alder had aged, but her eyes remained sharp. "Lady Viola," she said, taking both of Viola's hands. "You look as though London has been unkind." "That is not news. London often is." Viola almost smiled. "I need your help." "Then sit down and tell me only what matters." There was mercy in that too. Viola did. She did not recount every humiliation. She described the original letter to Edmund, the blue wax, the altered line, the copies, and the imitation of her hand. Mrs. Alder listened without interruption, then held out her hand. "Show me." Viola had brought one of the copied slips Adrian had sent to her that morning by trusted messenger. Mrs. Alder placed it near the window. Her face changed at once. Not with shock. With recognition. "This is not yours." Viola's throat tightened. "You are certain?" "My dear, I corrected your hand for 8 years. You form your V as if it has somewhere to go. This writer begins boldly, then fears the second stroke." She tapped the page. "Here. And here." The same hesitation appears in the lower loop of the L. Hannah, standing near the door, leaned in despite herself. Mrs. Alder continued, "Your sister had that fault as a girl." The room seemed to narrow. Viola heard the faint scratch of a cart outside, the ticking of a small clock, her own breath. "Celia? I did not say she wrote this." Mrs. Alder's voice became careful. "I said the mistake is one I saw in her hand whenever she tried to imitate yours." Viola closed her eyes. A memory came back, sudden and clear. Celia at 13, laughing over a schoolroom exercise, copying Viola's signature at the bottom of a page and declaring that no one would ever know the difference. Mrs. Alder had taken the page away and told her mimicry was not wit when used without honor. Viola opened her eyes. She has done this before. As a child, in foolishness. Children do many foolish things. Mrs. Alder's mouth grew firm. But a woman who carries childhood vanity into adult consequence is no longer playing. Viola folded the slip with steady hands. It hurt. That was the part she had not expected. She had suspected Celia, feared Celia, resented Celia. Yet proof still hurt, because betrayal by a sister did not cease to be betrayal simply because one had seen it coming. "Will you say this again if needed?" Viola asked. Mrs. Alder did not hesitate. "Yes. But be careful, Lady Viola. A person who fears exposure often becomes most convincing just before the truth reaches her." Viola returned to Belwick Hall near 4 o'clock, carrying more than a clue. She carried the first piece of her own rescue. Adrian had not taken it for her. Her father had not granted it. Her mother had not arranged it. She had gone out under her own name and brought back something that could speak. The feeling was new enough to frighten her. She went upstairs at once to place the copied slip in her writing desk. At her chamber door, she stopped. The porcelain dish on her dressing table was empty. The small brass key was gone. For one breath, the house was silent. Then Viola crossed the room and pulled open the writing desk drawer. Papers had been moved. Her sealing wax lay scattered. The folded draft of her old refusal to Edmund Ralston was no longer there. For a moment, Viola did not touch anything. The open drawer, the scattered sealing wax, and the empty place where the draft should have been seemed to belong to a stranger's room. Her own bedchamber had always been the one place in Belwick Hall where order could be trusted. The ribbons lay folded by color. The letters were tied by year. The ivory wax remained in the left compartment, the sand shaker in the right. Even her disappointments had been arranged neatly, because neatness had been the only form of control no one had thought worth taking from her. Now the drawer gaped like a mouth forced open. Hannah stood just inside the door, her hand pressed to her apron. "My lady, shall I call the housekeeper?" No, Viola's voice came out too calm, but calm was useful. Panic would only make her easier to manage. She lifted one sheet, then another. The draft was gone. Not the letter sent to Edmund, which had left her possession 3 years ago, but the original draft she had kept, folded in a small bundle with other discarded correspondence. It had contained the unaltered language of refusal. It might have shown how the false line had been cut and rearranged. Someone had known exactly what to remove. Viola looked at the porcelain dish again. "Find my mother's maid," she said. "Ask whether anyone entered this room while we were out. Do not accuse. Ask." Hannah nodded and slipped away. Viola closed the drawer, then opened it again, as if the missing page might be restored by refusing to accept its absence. Nothing changed. A small sound came from the doorway. Celia stood there, pale blue shawl over her shoulders, eyes wide with perfect alarm. "Viola? What has happened?" Viola turned slowly. "My writing desk has been opened." Celia's gaze dropped to the drawer, then to the scattered wax. "How dreadful!" "Yes. Was something taken?" The question was too quick. Viola heard it and saw Celia hear herself. A faint flush rose under her sister's skin. "A draft," Viola said. "A private draft of my letter to Mr. Ralston." Celia stepped into the room, one hand at her throat. "Why would you keep such a thing?" "Because it was mine. But now it is gone." Celia's voice lowered, not enough to be kind. "Viola, what will people think if the one paper that might explain you has vanished from your own desk?" The trap was so neat that Viola almost admired it. Theft became suspicion. Violation became guilt. They will think what they are taught to think. "Don't speak as if I did this." "I have not spoken your name." Celia's eyes filled at once. "You don't need to. You have looked at me that way since yesterday. As if I were a villain because I tried to protect his grace." Viola stepped closer, leaving the open desk behind her. "Protect him from what?" "From being deceived." "By me." "By whatever you refuse to explain." "I have explained." "Then why are papers disappearing?" Celia's voice rose enough to summon footsteps in the hall. Lady Windermere arrived first, breathless and already frightened. Lord Windermere followed with his face darkened by strain. Hannah hovered behind them, helpless. In less than a minute, Viola's bedchamber had become another drawing room, another place where Celia's tears could gather witnesses faster than Viola's facts. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Windermere demanded. Celia turned to him with a broken little gesture. "Papa, I only came to see whether Viola was well. She says her draft to Mr. Ralston is gone, and now she looks at me as if I stole it." "Did you?" Viola asked. Lady Windermere gasped. Celia staggered back as though the words had weight. "How can you ask me that?" "Because you had my key before. For ribbon. And now the draft is missing." "Viola," Lord Windermere said sharply. "You will not accuse your sister without proof." The unfairness of it struck with such familiar precision that Viola nearly smiled. Proof had not been required when Celia read a line before guests. Proof had not been required when society whispered over dinner. Proof was demanded only when Viola named the hand reaching toward her life. "Very well," she said. "Then I will say only this. Someone entered my locked desk and removed a paper that could have helped establish the truth." Lord Windermere paced toward the window, then back. "Do you understand what this is doing to us? To us. To this family. To the alliance. To the name Fairbourne." Viola looked at him, and for the first time in her life, the family name sounded less like heritage and more like a stone tied to her wrists. "I understand what it is doing to me. You are not the only consideration. I have rarely been treated as one at all." Lady Windermere whispered, "Viola, please." Celia covered her face. "I knew she would turn on me." Lord Windermere's voice hardened. "Enough. There may be one sensible course left." Viola already knew it before he said it. She felt the shape of the sacrifice approaching, dressed as Prudence. "You will write to Loxford," he said, "and offer to withdraw from the engagement until this matter is settled." Lady Windermere closed her eyes. Celia became very still. Viola heard the silence behind the command. Withdraw, so the Duke would not have to. Withdraw, so the family could say she had acted nobly. Withdraw, so Celia's accusation would not need to be answered too quickly. Withdraw, so the woman wounded by the lie could become the payment for it. No, Viola said. Lord Windermere stared. No. No, Papa. Her heart was beating hard, but her voice did not shake. I will not step aside from my own life because someone else has muddied the floor. His face flushed. You speak as though this is a game of pride. It is not pride to refuse disgrace I have not earned. Celia dropped her hands. You would drag all of us down rather than admit this has become impossible. Viola turned to her. What has become impossible, Celia? My innocence, or your story? Celia's mouth opened. No sound came. It was only a second, but everyone saw the gap before she filled it with tears. Lord Windermere pointed toward the door. Celia, go to your mother. Viola, you will remain here until you can speak with proper humility. The old Viola would have obeyed the tone, if not the instruction. This Viola walked to the desk, gathered the scattered wax, and placed it back into its compartment. Then she picked up a clean sheet of paper. I will write to His Grace, she said. But not the letter you want. Her father took one step toward her. Viola. She looked up. I am innocent. I will not make guilt more convenient for anyone by behaving like a culprit. No one answered. The room seemed to have forgotten how. When they left, it was not peace they left behind. It was shock. Viola sat at her desk with the door open, Hannah stationed visibly in the hall, and dipped her pen. Her first letter was to Adrian. She did not plead. She did not soften the facts with apology. She wrote that her desk had been opened, the draft removed, and the pressure upon her had shifted from social suspicion to family sacrifice. Then she wrote the sentence that mattered most. I do not ask your grace to rescue me from this matter. I ask to stand beside you when the truth is required to answer for itself. She sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with ivory wax. Her hand did not tremble. The second note was shorter and addressed to Mr. Edmund Ralston at his lodgings in Street James's. She asked him, with all courtesy due to a gentleman, to bring any letter he had ever received from her, especially the one written 3 years before. If her stolen draft was gone, perhaps the delivered truth still existed in another hand. When both letters were sealed, Viola rang for a footman she trusted because he had once returned a dropped glove without looking at the note tucked inside it. This one to Harrowden House, she said. Into His Grace's hand if possible. This one to Mr. Ralston. No delay. The footman bowed and left. Only then did Viola allow herself to sit back. In the corridor below, a door closed softly. Too softly. She rose and crossed to the landing in time to see the hem of a pale blue shawl vanish around the turn of the stairs. Celia had heard enough to know Edmund had been summoned. That meant the next lie would not be aimed at Viola. It would be aimed at the man who might still hold the truth. The reply from Harrowden House arrived before breakfast, carried by a Loxford footman whose livery made every servant at Belwick Hall stand a little straighter. Viola received it in the morning room while her father pretended to read the paper and Celia worked at her embroidery with such delicate concentration that not one stitch appeared upon the cloth. The Duke's hand was controlled and spare. He had received her account. He believed the missing draft mattered. He asked that Viola come to Harrowden House that afternoon with Lady Windermere as chaperone, so that all further steps might be discussed before rumour moved faster than truth. Beneath those formal lines, another sentence waited like a steady hand extended in silence. You will not be asked to stand behind me in a matter that bears your name. Viola read it twice. Then she folded the page and placed it beside her plate. His Grace requests that Mamma and I call this afternoon, she said. Lord Windermere lowered the newspaper. At Harrowden House. Yes. That is unusual. So is being accused with a forged letter. Celia's needle stopped. Lady Windermere whispered, Viola. Viola looked at her mother, not unkindly. I will not make the truth sound smaller so the breakfast table may remain comfortable. Lord Windermere's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. Perhaps he remembered that a duke, unlike a daughter, could not be ordered into humility. Celia resumed her embroidery, though her hand moved too quickly. And Mr. Ralston, she asked, as though the name pained her. Was he invited to this little council as well? Viola held her gaze. He was asked to bring any letter he has from me. How fortunate if he kept one. Yes, Viola said. Fortunate. Celia smiled faintly. Letters do go astray. By 2 o'clock, the sky above London had turned the colour of pewter, and Viola sat beside Lady Windermere in the family carriage, watching rain gather in fine silver threads upon the glass. Her mother had spoken only once since they left Belwick Hall. I hope you understand your father is afraid. Viola had answered, so am I. That had ended the conversation, because fear in a daughter was less useful than fear in a father. Harrowden House stood in Grosvenor Square with the restrained magnificence of old power. It did not need to announce itself. The stone steps were broad, the door black and polished, the brass knocker severe enough to discourage frivolous visitors. Adrian received them in a pale drawing-room that overlooked the square, with his widowed aunt, Lady Marchvale, seated near the hearth to satisfy every demand of propriety. Lady Marchvale had sharp eyes, silver hair, and the expression of a woman who had survived enough society to be unimpressed by most of it. She greeted Viola with a kindness too intelligent to become pity. My dear, His Grace has told me very little, which is how I know the matter is serious. Viola curtsied. Then I am grateful for what he did not say. Good, Lady Marchvale replied. A woman who appreciates restraint may yet survive London. Adrian stood near the window with several folded papers upon the table beside him. The original blue-sealed letter lay there, weighted by a small silver knife. 2 copied scraps from Lady Harbridge's dinner and the opera had been placed beside it. Their neat arrangement made the ugliness clearer. Mr. Ralston has not arrived, Adrian said. He sent no refusal. Viola asked. None. A footman entered then, bowing at the door. Your Grace, a message from Mr. Ralston's lodgings. The gentleman left at the appointed hour, but there was confusion over the carriage sent for him. It took him first toward Cavendish Square, then returned to the Mews. He is now on his way in a hired carriage. Lady Windermere looked bewildered. Confusion. Adrian's face went still in the way Viola had learned to read as anger under discipline. A very convenient confusion. You think Celia arranged it, Viola said. Lady Windermere made a soft protest. Adrian did not answer at once. I think someone knew Mr. Ralston's arrival would be inconvenient. Viola looked down at the papers. The false letter. The copied line. The stolen draft. Each had seemed at first like a separate humiliation. Now they formed a path, and every step led back toward the same delicate hand. Lady Marchvale rose. Eleanor, come with me. I want your opinion on whether my cook has made the tea too strong. Lady Windermere blinked. I beg your pardon. You heard me perfectly. The conservatory door will remain open, and I shall be 12 feet away with a bad cup of tea and excellent hearing. She swept toward the adjoining conservatory before Lady Windermere could object. Adrian looked at Viola. Only if you are comfortable. I am comfortable with doors open, Viola said. I have had enough of closed ones. They stepped into the conservatory, where orange trees in glazed tubs scented the damp air and rain tapped softly against the glass roof. Lady Marchvale and Lady Windermere remained visible through the open door, seated with their tea. Adrian stopped near a table of ferns, keeping a proper distance. Before Mr. Ralston arrives, I must say something that may sound like retreat. Viola's heart tightened despite herself. Then perhaps say it plainly. You may leave the engagement if you wish. For a moment, all sound seemed to withdraw from the room. Even the rain became distant. Viola looked at him, and the pain came so quickly that she almost mistook it for anger. I see. His expression altered. No. I do not think you do. Do I not? You are offering to return me before the damage reaches your doorstep. No, the word was immediate. I am offering you freedom before the weight of my name becomes another instrument used against you. She stared at him. That is a graceful distinction. It is not a distinction. It is the whole matter. He took a breath, and for the first time he seemed less certain of the perfect sentence before speaking it. I have watched your family call sacrifice duty whenever the sacrifice was yours. I will not do the same and call it protection. If you remain engaged to me, it must not be because scandal trapped you beside a duke." Viola turned toward the glass, where rain slid downward in bright, broken lines. The part of her that had been trained for family survival wanted to accept the offer as proof of honor. The part of her that had found Mrs. Alder, named the missing draft, and written to Adrian without begging refused to be dismissed with dignity as if dismissal were mercy. "If I leave now," she said, "London will believe I was guilty. London's belief is a poor compass. It is still the weather a woman must walk through. Then I will walk through it with you, if you choose." She looked back at him. "Do you believe me because the evidence is beginning to favor me? No, do you believe me because Mr. Ralston denied the line? No, then why?" Adrian's gaze held hers, grave and unadorned. "Because when your sister read that line, you looked less like a woman caught in sin than a woman hearing her own voice used against her. Because you asked for the letter before you asked for mercy. Because every time someone offered you an easier lie, you chose the harder truth." Viola's throat tightened. "And if the proof does not come? Then I will still have chosen what kind of man I am while standing beside you." She shook her head once, not in refusal, but in the desperate need to make him understand the one thing she could not live without now. "I do not need you to save me by believing me after London permits it. I need you to believe me before it becomes safe." His voice lowered. "I chose to believe you from the moment I asked for the letter." The words entered her differently than comfort. They entered as confirmation of something she had feared to hope. Viola looked toward the open door, where Lady Marchvale pretended not to listen and Lady Windermere sat very still with one hand over her cup. Then the sound of hurried footsteps came from the hall. The footman appeared at the drawing-room door, damp at the shoulders from rain. "Your Grace, Mr. Ralston has arrived." Behind him stood Edmund Ralston, pale from haste, hat in hand, his coat speckled with rain. He bowed first to Adrian, then to Viola. "Forgive me. The carriage sent for me was misdirected, and then another note claimed the meeting had been postponed." Adrian's eye sharpened. "Another note?" Edmund reached inside his coat. "Yes. I kept it, because the hand looked wrong." Then, with visible care, he drew out a folded letter sealed in old ivory wax. "And I brought this as Lady Viola requested. Her letter to me from 3 years ago. I never had the heart to burn it." Viola looked at the ivory seal, unbroken by time though softened at the edges, and felt the room shift around her. The truth had arrived late, but it had arrived. Edmund Ralston's letter did not look powerful enough to quiet a room, and that was why Viola trusted it. It had not been dressed for drama. The ivory wax was dulled with age. The fold had softened along its edges. The direction bore Edmund's careful hand, not hers, because he had kept it inside the same outer sheet in which it had once been delivered to him. It looked like what it was. A private refusal preserved by a gentleman who had suffered disappointment without turning it into revenge. Adrian did not reach for it at once. He looked first to Viola. "May I?" he asked. The question was small. It mattered. The false letter had been taken from her, read over her, used against her, copied beyond her control. This one waited for permission. Viola nodded. "Yes." Edmund placed it upon the table beside the blue-sealed page and the copied scraps. Lady Marchvale rose from her chair and came closer. Lady Windermere remained seated, one hand pressed against her bodice as though the truth itself might be too strong a draught. Adrian broke no seal, because the letter had been opened years before. He unfolded the page with care. His eyes moved over it once. Then again. When he looked up, the sternness in his face had not eased, but it had changed direction. "This is not merely different," he said. "It is the source." Viola stepped nearer. "May I see?" He handed it to her without hesitation. Her own handwriting came back to her like the voice of a younger self she had almost forgotten. "Dear Mr. Ralston, I have considered your proposal with the seriousness due to your character and kindness." The sentence was hers. So was the next. And the next. Then came the words that had been butchered into shame. "When the house is quiet, I find myself able to answer you with the honesty you deserve. What remains between us, I hope, will be respect, for I cannot accept your hand where my heart offers only gratitude." Viola read the lines once in silence. The room blurred, not because she wept, but because for days she had been forced to stand beside a version of herself that did not exist. Now the true voice returned, modest and steady, and it hurt to recognize how easily it had been stolen. "That is what I wrote," she said. Edmund bowed his head. "It is. I was wounded then, I admit. But never dishonored. You refused me kindly, Lady Viola. I should have said so sooner. You had no reason to know you would need to." Adrian placed the false letter beside the true one. Even Lady Windermere could see it now. The phrases had been cut from different places, rearranged, darkened by another hand. The scribe of the lie had not invented Viola's voice. She had done something more intimate. She had looted it. Adrian turned to Edmund. "You also mentioned another note." Edmund produced a smaller folded paper, damp at one corner from the rain. "It came to my lodgings less than an hour after Lady Viola's request. It claimed the meeting had been postponed until tomorrow and that I should avoid Harrowden House for fear of increasing gossip." Lady Marchvale made a contemptuous sound. "How tenderly wicked." Adrian read the note. "No signature." "None, Your Grace." "But it came after Lady Viola's message." "Yes." Adrian placed it with the others. "Then someone knew you were expected." Lady Windermere closed her eyes. The knowledge seemed to strike her before she allowed herself to name it. "This cannot be Celia." Viola looked at her mother. "Mamma." "No. I mean, she is foolish sometimes. Vain. Sensitive. But this is deliberate." "Yes," Viola said quietly. "It is." The word hung there without ornament. Lady Windermere looked smaller for hearing it. Adrian rang for a footman and gave instructions for Mrs. Alder to be brought to Harrowden House if she would consent, and for Lord Windermere, Lady Celia, Lady Harbridge, and 2 other witnesses from the first gathering to be invited the following morning under his seal. He did not call it a trial. That would have been too modern, too public, too crude. He called it a necessary clarification before persons already involved. Everyone understood the weight of the phrase. In society, a necessary clarification could ruin more cleanly than a shouted accusation. "Must there be witnesses?" Lady Windermere asked. "There already were," Adrian replied. "Your daughter was accused before witnesses. She will not be restored in whispers." Viola felt those words settle inside her, deep and firm. Restored. Not managed. Not excused. Restored. Edmund looked relieved, but uneasy. "Your Grace, I shall attend if needed, though I regret causing Lady Viola further distress." "You did not cause it," Viola said. "You may help end it." He bowed, and there was dignity in his sadness. When he had withdrawn to write a brief statement for Adrian Stewart, Lady Marchvale crossed to Viola with a letter still lying open on the table between them. "My dear, tomorrow will not be pleasant. No, people imagine truth makes a room gentle. It does not. It makes a room honest, and many people prefer gentleness." Viola almost smiled. "I have had enough gentleness without honesty." Lady Marchvale's eyes warmed. "Good." Adrian turned from the table. "You need not read the letter yourself tomorrow." Viola looked at him. "Yes, I do." Lady Windermere rose. "Viola, perhaps His Grace should conduct the matter. It would spare you. Being spared has not protected me." Her mother stopped. Viola touched the edge of the true letter. Celia read one stolen line before people who were ready to believe it. "I will read the whole truth before people who were willing to doubt me." Adrian said nothing for a moment. Then he inclined his head. "Then you shall." Lady Windermere's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Perhaps she had begun to understand that tears, in that house, had too often been spent on the person performing injury rather than the one receiving it. The next hour passed in arrangements, but not the empty kind that once would have smothered Viola in male decisions. Adrian asked which witnesses she could endure. Viola chose Lady Harbridge because her drawing room had helped the scandal travel. She chose Sir Alton Merrick because he had been present at the first accusation and could not resist repeating whatever truth he heard next. She chose Mrs. Alder because handwriting needed memory, not spectacle. She chose Edmund because the letter had once belonged to his pain too. And Celia? Adrian asked. She must come, Viola said. If she is not made to face the whole page, she will spend years living inside the one line she preferred. Lady Marchvale gave a short approving nod. There speaks a future Duchess. Viola looked down, startled by how the word struck her. Future Duchess. Until now it had sounded like an ornament hung around her neck by family necessity. In that room, with the old letter beneath her hand and the Duke standing not before her but beside her, it sounded almost like a task she might choose. As dusk gathered against the windows, Adrian walked with Viola as far as the open door of the drawing-room, where Lady Windermere and Lady Marchvale remained in sight. He stopped at the threshold. Tomorrow, I will manage the room. And me. He met her gaze. Never you. Her breath caught. He continued, quieter, I will stand beside you, not in front of you, unless you ask it. There were no vowels in the sentence. No improper softness. Yet it reached deeper than any compliment she had ever received. Then tomorrow, Viola said, I will ask only that you do not let them turn away before the truth is finished. They will not turn away. The answer was so calm that she believed him. At Belwick Hall that evening, Celia received the Duke's formal note in the sitting-room, with her mother watching and her father pale behind the brandy decanter. She read it once, then twice. Her fingers tightened around the page until the fine paper bent. A clarification, she said softly. How grand. No one answered. For the first time, no one rushed to comfort her. Across London, in Harrowden House, the true letter rested under Adrian's seal beside the false one. By morning, the room that had nearly buried Viola beneath a stolen line would be asked to hear the whole page. By 11 o'clock the next morning, the drawing-room at Harrowden House held more truth and comfort. Adrian had chosen the room deliberately. It was large enough to prevent any appearance of secrecy, but not so grand that the matter could become a spectacle. Sunlight fell through tall windows onto a table where 4 papers lay in a straight line, the blue-sealed letter, the true letter from Edmund Ralston, 1 copied scrap from Lady Harbridge's dinner, and the false note that had tried to keep Edmund away. Viola stood beside the table, not behind it. She had slept little, but her gown was orderly, her gloves spotless, and her face calm in the way a candle is calm when protected by glass. Lady Marchvale sat near the hearth with the alert stillness of a general observing a battlefield. Lord and Lady Windermere arrived first. Her father looked diminished by the morning light, as though anxiety had taken the starch from his collar. Her mother looked from Viola to the table and then away, unable to choose between dread and shame. Lady Harbridge entered next, dressed in dark violet silk and carrying the cautious expression of a woman who had accepted an invitation before realizing she might be used as more than an audience. Sir Alton Merrick followed, eager despite his attempt to appear solemn. Edmund Ralston came quietly, bowing to Viola with grave respect. Mrs. Alder arrived last among the witnesses, neat in grey, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Then Celia entered. She wore white. Viola noticed that first. Not primrose, not pale blue, but white muslin with a narrow sash, chosen to make innocence visible before anyone asked for it. Celia curtsied to Adrian, then looked at Viola with wounded astonishment. I had hoped we might end this privately. Adrian closed the door only halfway, leaving it open enough for propriety and closed enough for finality. It became public when you made it public. Celia flinched. Lady Windermere whispered her name, but did not rise. Adrian gestured toward the chairs. No one has been brought here for punishment by noise. You are here because Lady Viola was accused before witnesses. The correction will also have witnesses. Lady Harbridge's fan stopped moving. Lord Windermere cleared his throat. Your Grace, I trust this can be handled with discretion. Discretion was available before a lady's name was dragged through drawing rooms and opera boxes. Adrian's voice was quiet. It was not chosen. No one answered. Viola felt the room turn toward her, waiting to see whether she would shrink from the center of it. She did not. Adrian looked at her. Lady Viola. She picked up Edmund's letter. Her hand remained steady. For a moment, she saw again the younger woman who had written it, uncertain but honest, choosing not to accept a kind man simply because the world rewarded women for gratitude. Then she read aloud. Dear Mr. Ralston, I have considered your proposal with the seriousness due to your character and kindness. When the house is quiet, I find myself able to answer you with the honesty you deserve. What remains between us, I hope, will be respect, for I cannot accept your hand where my heart offers only gratitude. The silence that followed was not the same silence that had condemned her at Belwick Hall. This one had weight, but it also had shape. It contained the whole sentence. The whole truth. Edmund bowed his head. That is the letter I received. There was no meeting. No secret understanding. No improper attachment. Viola placed the true letter down. Adrian took up the blue-sealed one and laid it beside the original. The false letter uses fragments from Lady Viola's refusal. A quiet house becomes a secret meeting. Respect becomes what remains between lovers. Gratitude is removed entirely because gratitude does not serve scandal. Celia clasped her hands. I did not alter anything. No one has yet said you did, Adrian replied. You answered quickly. Colour rose in Celia's face. Mrs. Alder stepped forward when Adrian inclined his head. I taught both sisters their letters. Lady Viola's hand is clean in the downward stroke. The copyist knew the general shape, but not the discipline beneath it. Here, in the V, and again in the lower loop of the L, there is a hesitation I remember from Lady Celia's schoolroom imitations. Celia gave a short laugh. Schoolroom imitations? I was a child. Then perhaps you should not have repeated a child's trick with a woman's reputation, Mrs. Alder said. Lady Windermere made a faint sound, as if the words had struck her chest. Celia turned to her mother at once. Mamma, you cannot believe this. They have all decided against me. Viola has always been able to make herself look noble by standing still and letting me appear frivolous. Viola looked at her sister then. I have stood still because moving hurt other people's pride. Celia's eyes flashed. There. Do you hear her? She has always thought herself better. No, Viola said. Only tired. Adrian placed the copied scrap from Lady Harbridge's dinner beside the others. This line appeared before the original left my possession. Several copies were prepared in advance. Lady Harbridge shifted. A scrap was indeed found in my house. And the note to Mr. Ralston. Adrian held up the false postponement. Sent after Lady Viola requested his presence. It attempted to keep the one gentleman who held the true letter away from this room. Edmund stepped forward. It was delivered by a boy who said it came from Belwick Hall. Celia shook her head. Anyone could claim that. Yes, Adrian said. But not anyone had the blue wax. The room stilled. Celia's face changed before she could stop it. Adrian turned to Lord Windermere. Your lordship, with your permission, Lady Marchvale's maid examined the small writing case Lady Celia brought here this morning after Lady Windermere consented. Lady Windermere closed her eyes. Lord Windermere stared at his younger daughter. Adrian lifted a small stick of sealing wax from the table drawer and placed it beside the broken blue seal. It matches. Celia's lips parted. No sound came. Then she recovered, but not fully. Blue wax is not a crime. No, Adrian said. Nor is jealousy. Nor is vanity. But theft, imitation, and calculated public accusation are not mere feeling. The room seemed to wait for Celia's tears. They came, but too late to command the room as they once had. You all want me guilty, she whispered. Because she stands there so calm, and I feel everything, I am wicked. Viola answered before anyone else could. Feeling deeply does not give you the right to wound accurately. Celia's face twisted. You always had duty. You always had pity. Papa trusted you with every serious matter, Mamma praised your composure, and now even the Duke chooses you. You stand there in grey silk, and everyone calls it dignity. If I shine, I am vain. If I weep, I am theatrical. If I want what you have, I am cruel. The confession was not clean. It was not a neat admission signed and sealed. It was better. It was the truth of motive, spoken before the people Celia had hoped to use. Lord Windermere sank slowly into a chair. Lady Windermere covered her mouth. Lady Harbridge looked away, perhaps ashamed, perhaps only disappointed that cruelty had become unfashionable in the room. Celia realized too late what she had revealed. "I did not mean it that way." Adrian looked at her without softness. "You meant it enough to use your sister's name as a ladder." Viola felt no triumph. Only release, and beneath it grief. "You will leave London," she said. Celia stared. "What?" "You will leave the season. You will not call upon Lady Harbridge, or any house where this story was fed, to offer your wounded version of events. You will not speak of my correspondence again. If you wish for forgiveness one day, you may begin by ceasing to injure me." Celia looked to her father. For once, he did not move to shield her. Adrian turned to Lord Windermere. "And you, my lord, will correct what your daughter's silence was asked to bear." Lord Windermere looked at Viola. His pride resisted longer than his conscience. Then his shoulders lowered. "Viola," he said, and his voice broke in a place she had never heard. "I was afraid for the family. I made that fear your burden. I was wrong." The apology did not erase the wound, but it named it. That was something. Viola inclined her head. "Thank you, Papa." Adrian turned to the room. "My engagement to Lady Viola stands. Not because the accusation has now become inconvenient for others, and not because I require society's permission to know whom I trust. I chose to believe Lady Viola when this room's first instinct elsewhere was to doubt her. I choose her still." Viola's breath caught. The words were public, restrained, and absolute. They did not rescue her from the truth. They stood beside it. When the witnesses began to leave, they did so quietly. Lady Harbridge curtsied to Viola with a humility too late to be generous, but not too late to be useful. Sir Alton looked chastened, which meant the corrected story would travel by nightfall. Mrs. Alder squeezed Viola's hand once and departed. Edmund bowed with relief in his sad eyes. Celia left between her parents, white gown dimmed by the morning. Only when the room was nearly empty did Adrian lift the true letter and place it in Viola's hand. "It belongs to you." Viola looked down at the ivory wax, then up at him. He did not ask the room. He asked her. "Do you still wish to become Duchess of Loxford?" For the first time since the first blue seal appeared, the choice felt entirely her own. Viola did not answer Adrian in Harrowden House that morning, not because she doubted him, but because the question deserved more than a reply made while the room still held the heat of judgment. She had looked down at the true letter in her hand, at the softened ivory wax and the lines restored to their proper meaning, and she had understood that a woman could be vindicated before witnesses and still need time to hear her own heart without an audience. Adrian had accepted that without pressing her. That, more than any declaration, had followed her through the weeks that came after. London changed its voice first. It always did. The same ladies who had leaned over fans to ask whether Lady Viola Fairbourne had been too private now sent invitations written in generous hands. Lady Harbridge called once with a note of apology so carefully worded that it preserved her pride while surrendering her certainty. Sir Alton Merrick, having discovered that corrected scandal travelled nearly as well as false scandal, repeated the story of the forged letter with such solemn disapproval that half of Mayfair had learned by Tuesday that Lady Viola had been shamefully wronged and most admirably composed. The world did not become kind. Viola was too sensible to expect that. But it became cautious. Caution, after cruelty, felt almost like fresh air. Celia left London before the end of the week. Lady Windermere announced that her younger daughter required quiet in Bath with Aunt Lavinia, a widow famous for early rising, plain speech, and a household in which no young lady received letters without supervision. Celia did not come to Viola's room before departing. She sent no apology. Viola watched from an upper window as the carriage rolled away, pale blue ribbons tied to one trunk, the color bright against the dull leather. She felt grief, but it was no longer the grief of being unloved. It was the quieter grief of no longer pretending harm was affection in a prettier dress. Lord Windermere changed more slowly. Men of his rank often believed remorse should be dignified enough not to inconvenience them. Yet 3 days after the confrontation, he sent for Mr. Pritchard and, with visible discomfort, amended Viola's marriage settlement. Her portion would be secured for her personal use. Her correspondence would remain under her own lock and authority. No family debt, old or new, would be folded into her future as if daughters were ledgers with faces. When he told her, he did not look proud of the act. That made it better. Pride would have turned justice into generosity. "It is what should have been done before," he said, standing beside his study desk with both hands clasped behind his back. Viola inclined her head. "Yes, Papa." He winced at the plainness, then nodded. "You have your mother's composure." Viola thought of all the years that phrase had been used to make silence sound hereditary. "No," she said gently. "I have my own." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, at last, he bowed his head. A fortnight later, Viola travelled to Harrowden Court with Lady Marchvale as chaperone and Lady Windermere in attendance, though her mother had learned by then to fill silences with less instruction. The road carried them away from London's sharp windows and gossiping thresholds into a countryside washed clean by spring rain. Harrowden Court rose beyond a long avenue of elms, its grey stone warmed by late afternoon light, its lawn sweeping wide and green toward a silver ribbon of water. It did not glitter like a house eager to impress. It endured. Viola felt that before she understood it. The place had the stillness of something that knew its own name. Adrian was waiting on the steps when the carriage drew up. No crowd stood behind him. No footmen arranged themselves in theatrical rows. Only the house, the mild air, Lady Marchvale's satisfied expression, and the man who had once asked for a letter when everyone else had wanted a verdict. He handed Viola down with all proper formality. "Welcome to Harrowden Court, Lady Viola." She looked past him to the open door, the wide hall, the staircase rising in clean lines beyond. "It is quieter than I expected." "That can be amended if you find peace tiresome." "I have not had enough of it to judge." His gaze softened. "Then we shall not rush your opinion." Lady Marchvale declared that she wished to see whether the housekeeper had remembered her preferred room, and Lady Windermere was carried away by the necessity of inspecting guest chambers, which left Viola and Adrian in the morning room with the door open and a footman visible in the corridor. The room overlooked the eastern lawn. It was neither grand nor small, with pale walls, a writing table near the window, and shelves of books that appeared to have been read rather than arranged. Upon the writing table stood a new desk of polished walnut, modest in size and beautiful in workmanship. A small brass key lay upon its top. Viola stopped. Adrian did not speak until she looked at him. "It is yours." Her fingers hovered near the key but did not touch it. "A writing desk." "With a lock made by a man in Oxford Street who looked offended when I asked whether it was reliable." "That was brave of you." "I have faced Parliament. It did not prepare me for craftsmen." She almost smiled, but the feeling beneath the smile was too deep to be light. "Why?" Adrian's answer came without ornament. "Because no one should ever again take your words and use them without your consent." The room blurred for one dangerous second. Viola turned toward the window until she could trust her face. She had received jewels from relatives, flowers from callers, compliments from people who wanted to repair their own discomfort. This was different. This was not a gift meant to decorate her. It was meant to restore a boundary the world had treated as optional. She drew the true letter from the reticule at her wrist. Adrian had returned it to her that day at Harrowden House, and she had carried it ever since, not because she enjoyed remembering the wound, but because she had not yet known where the truth could safely rest. Now she unlocked the desk. Inside was clean paper, fresh ivory sealing wax, a sand shaker, and space enough for what belonged to her. She placed Edmund's true letter in the drawer. After a moment, she placed the blue-sealed false one beside it, its broken seal turned upward like a defeated eye. Adrian watched in silence. "I thought I would want to burn it," she said. "And now?" "Now I think I want to remember that it did not win." She closed the drawer and turned the key. The sound was small, precise, and final. Adrian stood a few feet away, close enough for warmth, far enough for respect. "I loved you before the room believed you," he said. Viola looked at him, startled by the simplicity of it. He continued, quieter. Not because you were innocent. Though you were. Not because you were wronged. Though you were. I loved you because you stood there with your name being taken from you and still refused to become what they called you. Her heart answered before her voice did. For so long, she had been praised for usefulness, composure, duty, restraint. He spoke instead of choice. Of selfhood. Of the part of her no accusation had reached. I needed to know, she said, that if I became Duchess of Loxford, it would not be because your title rescued me from my family's shame. And now? She touched the locked desk. Now I know it would be because I chose the life being offered. His breath changed, barely. Then may I ask again? Viola turned fully toward him. The afternoon light lay between them like a vow not yet spoken. Yes. Do you still wish to become Duchess of Loxford? She thought of Belwick Hall, of the blue seal on the tray, of Celia's trembling voice, of the theatre's staring boxes, of the carriage where she had told him silence could wound, of the drawing room where her own letter had been returned to its whole meaning. Then she thought of the desk, the key, the man who had learned how to stand beside her without standing over her. Yes, she said. I do. Adrian did not take her hand until she offered it. When he bowed over her gloved fingers, the gesture remained perfectly proper, and yet Viola felt the future open with more tenderness than any impropriety could have given it. Weeks later, when she wrote her first letter from Harrowden Court, she sat at the walnut desk while morning light spilled across the page. She wrote to Mrs. Alder first, because some debts of courage deserved to be acknowledged. Her hand was steady. The ivory wax warmed beside the candle. Outside, Adrian walked across the lawn with his steward, pausing once to look toward the window as if knowing exactly where she would be. Viola smiled, dipped her pen, and signed the page without hesitation. Lady Viola Fairbourne, future Duchess of Loxford. Then she folded the letter, sealed it, and locked the drawer with the blue-sealed lie inside, no longer a weapon, no longer a wound, but proof that a stolen voice could be returned and made stronger for having survived.